Robert Mugabe's daughter, Bona, and her husband Simba Chikore are locked in a bitter fight over property that could help lift the lid on the wealth of the family of Zimbabwe's first president. Bona last week filed for divorce from Chikore, 9 years after the couple were married in a glamorous wedding in Harare. The late Mugabe's only daughter said she wanted to get the marriage dissolved on the grounds that there was a total breakdown with no prospects of restoring the union. She is seeking maintenance of their 3 children of $2,700 per child until they attain their majority age or become self-sustaining, whichever occurs first. Bona said during the subsistence of their marriage, they jointly and individually acquired movable and immovable property, but she indicated that dealing with the property issues in the divorce suit would delay the granting of the divorce. It has since emerged from Mugabe family members and associates that the sharing of the property is being delayed because of fierce disputes that have erupted between the two over assets. Chikore is accused of demanding some property that Bona is said to have inherited from her father, who ruled Zimbabwe with an iron fist for 37 years. It was revealed that the Mugabe and Chikore families tried for several months to deal with the nasty fallout. They said Chikore made outrageous demands on the sharing of property, which resulted in a stalemate that forced Bona to approach the courts. Mugabe family sources claimed that Chikore wanted to cling on to the Winsdale mansion situated in the upmarket suburb of Harare that houses top government officials and executives. Bona, the sources said, is not willing to give away the property she claimed had nothing to do with Chikore, who is accused of trying to reap where he did not sow. The two are also said to be locked in a wrangle over 80 herd of cattle at Monuavo Farm close to the new parliament in Mount Hampton. Farm workers claimed Chikore sold the cattle and pocketed the proceeds. A quick search on the ownership of the farm shows that it was owned by the Mugabe family and is a 300-hectare estate formerly known as Sigaro. The farm was initially taken over by the Agricultural and Rural Development Authority, ARDA, before being named ARDA Sigaro. ARDA then mobilized equipment for the farm before the Mugabes took over the land. Chikore was not reachable for comment despite several attempts, while Bona's lawyer Fungai Chimwamarum only confirmed filing the paper relating to the divorce case. Chimwamarum said issues to do with property were not part of the papers filed by Bona. Chikore is yet to respond to the court application for divorce. The two married on March 1, 2014 at a lavish ceremony at the late Mugabe's family private home in Harare's plush Borodale suburb. The wedding, which was broadcast live on state-controlled ZBC, was attended by 3 heads of state: the then South African President Jacob Zuma, the late Zambian President Michael Sata and his wife Joyce, and Equatorial Guinea President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, family, friends and other dignitaries from all over southern Africa. The ceremony was officiated by Roman Catholic Vicar General Father Kennedy Mugudi, who impressed upon the young couple to be faithful to each other. The extent of Mugabe's wealth was never been revealed before his death in 2019. His estate, published in December 2019, said he left $10 million in the bank, some small plots of land and a handful of modest properties. However, the publication of the estate was greeted with skepticism by many who believed that Mugabe, together with his wife Grace, amassed wealth that could be valued in billions of United States dollars before he was toppled. While the late former President Robert Mugabe's daughter Bona and her estranged husband Simba Chikore are still locked in divorce proceedings and intense negotiations on property sharing, the controversial pilot has sold 100 cattle belonging to the couple, prompting contemplation of a police case against him. This has set the stage for a dramatic and messy divorce which Bona is desperate to avoid to protect her name and family reputation. Chikore's name is already mired in a series of controversial issues, including the Zimbabwe Airways scandal and the attempt to build a $39 million mansion at the foot of a mountain next to Venue Umwinzi, in Umwinsidale. The house is accessible through Carrick Creek Road, Umwinsidale Road, and Luna Road, which converge along the way from opposite directions. However, the fight for the estate is likely to be fiercely contested as it involves a sentimental house at No. 40 Corn Avenue in Mount Pleasant, Harare, where Mugabe first stayed when he became Prime Minister in 1980. Chikore is demanding his pound of flesh. One of the properties likely to trigger noise between Bona and Simba is the historic Mount Pleasant house donated to them during their wedding. But after Mugabe gifted them the Mount Pleasant house, the couple asked him to build them a house of their choice and dreams. As the divorce negotiations intensify, it has now emerged Bona offered Chikore a house in Chisawasha, motor vehicles, cattle and other significant assets as part of the divorce settlement. However, Chikore promptly rejected the offer, demanding, instead, to be given more properties, including in Harare's upmarket Umwinsidale, which Bona is holding onto on the grounds that they were donated to her through her late father's estate. An investigation by the Newshawks in 2021 into the property development showed that the construction of the 25-room house is estimated to cost at least $20 million. It was originally expected to cost $39 million. The imposing mansion sits on a 22-hectare tract of land that cascades down the mountain right to its foot in the Umwinsi River Valley in Umwinsidale. To put it into perspective, the house is built on land that is bigger than the Harare Gardens, which sit on 21 hectares. The house's plinth, a built-up area measured at the floor level of the story or at the basement, is about 700-800 square meters. The multi-story house has a basement which is 1,200 square meters, ground floor, 3,000 square meters, first floor, 3,000 square meters, and a sun deck which is 600 square meters. In the basement are 9 rooms, including an apartment, while the ground floor has 8 rooms and the first floor has another 8 rooms. When all these additional features are factored in, the house will cost well over $20 million, according to conservative estimates. The initial planned cost was $39 million, before Mugabe's death gave Simba and Bona a financial reality check. At the moment, the total cost of the house is expected to be at least $20 million. This is because the owners of the property are now struggling to finish the house, which at the beginning was supposed to cost $39 million, said a source at the Mugabe's Blue Roof family home in Borodale, Harare. The late former president was financing the project. Mugabe said he would fund the Umwinsidale project. He paid for everything before he died. Simba and Bona are now struggling to complete it. It is a huge project, they need millions of US dollars to complete it. The source said if Mugabe was still alive, the cost would escalate to around $39 million US, considering the price of the vast tracts of land. Construction expenses, design charges, finishings and landscaping, which he would have been prepared to finance. The price would have been much higher if they still had money, because in an elevated mountain area like that it might have cost up to $5,000 per square meter to build, but that has now been contained at $2,500 per square meter, another source said. While Bona has offered Chikore some properties, her separated husband is demanding to be given more properties, which she is flatly refusing to do. This is contrary to Bona's wish to quickly finalize the divorce and settle all outstanding issues without drama. In her high court summons issued to Chikore, Bona prays the divorce must be quickly granted, while the property issue would be dealt with later in a separate suit as permitted by Section 7 of the Matrimonial Causes Act, Chapter 513. She says since the marriage has now irretrievably broken down, dealing with proprietary issues now will only delay granting the divorce decree. She adds that it is just and equitable to address that after divorce. Meanwhile, the parties are still engaging each other on their proprietary interests and rights. This has led to disagreements on how to share the properties. Section 71(2) of the Constitution stipulates that every person has the right, in any part of Zimbabwe, to acquire, hold, occupy, use, transfer, hypothecate, lease or dispose all forms of property. This includes even on divorce. The principal act that governs division of property is the Matrimonial Causes Act, Chapter 513. Section 7(1)(a) of the Act provides that in granting a decree of divorce, judicial separation or nullity of marriage, a court may make an order with regard to the division, apportionment or distribution and transfer of the assets from one spouse to the other. An order made may contain consequential provisions expedient for the purpose of giving effect to it and making operate fairly. Subsection 3 of the same provision goes further to limit the power of a court in making an order not to extend to any assets which are proved to have been acquired by a spouse, whether before or during the marriage by way of an inheritance, or in terms of any custom are intended to be held by the spouse personally, or which have particular sentimental value to the spouse concerned. In making an order, a court shall have regard to all the circumstances of the case, including the direct or indirect contributions made by each spouse to the family. Zimbabwean jurisprudence has evolved on the subject based on the fact that all civil marriages in the country are out of community of property, meaning that there is no joining of estates and each spouse keeps his/her estate separate. Upon divorce, a court must begin by sorting out the property into 3 lots, which are termed his, hers and theirs. The court does not simply lump all the property together and then hand it out as fair. Section 7(3) of the Act explains the process. In a jointly owned property, each spouse owns a 50% share. One of the greatest fears of people upon divorce is fear of losing property. For most people, property represents stability for family, while to others it represents their own financial stability. Property might be in the form of movable or immovable, corporeal or incorporeal, and tangible or intangible property. Proprietary issues are always ancillary to the divorce. How property rights are dealt with on divorce differs from one jurisdiction to another. Bona has filed for divorce with her husband of 9 years Simba on the grounds that their marriage has irretrievably broken down with no prospect of restoration. She filed divorce summons in the High Court on Tuesday. The late President Robert Mugabe stopped his son-in-law Simba Chikore and daughter Bona from joining the scramble to take over the country's third-largest mobile network operator, Telecel Zimbabwe. The news hawks has confirmed that Chikore and Bona in 2015 approached the then Minister of Information Communication Technology, Postal, and Courier Services, Supa Mandiwanzira, seeking to leverage their powerful family position and influence through Mugabe and his wife Grace to take control of Telecel. At the time, Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of the late Angola President Eduardo dos Santos, Africa's richest woman then before her business empire crumbled in chaos amid corruption charges, also wanted to buy Telecel. For 37 years, while her father ruled Angola, Isabel held the top positions in the state trade of diamonds and oil and became one of the most influential people in and outside Africa. Following a well-established system of kleptocracy and nepotism, Isabel had been able to weave a complex web of companies and banks related to her family, mostly in tax havens, but also with the complicity of corrupt businessmen, lawyers and consultants. Isabel already had shareholding in Angolan mobile phone company Unitel SA. Ownership of Unitel was split equally between Isabel, Brazilian telecoms company Oi, Angolan state oil company Sonangol, and Angolan businessman and former government official Leopoldino do Nascimento. As part of her business expansion program, Isabel then flew to Zimbabwe below the radar and met with Grace to cut the Telecel deal, but that did not go anywhere as local corporate vultures were already circling above the company. Simba and Bona wanted to use their family position and influence to take over Telecel through an undisclosed bid and funding structure. They approached Mandiwanzira for discussions about that, hoping the minister would simply fast-track the deal for them. However, Mandiwanzira asked to meet Mugabe to seek guidance on the matter. As the minister responsible. Typically, the late president completely refused to sanction the deal, a source said. From there, Mandiwanzira did not facilitate anything as he had been told by Mugabe that it shouldn't happen. While Mugabe destroyed the economy through leadership, governance and policy failures, as well as mismanagement and corruption, he did not actively push for his family's primitive accumulation of wealth and self-enrichment as is happening now. After the jostle for Telecel, Nasdaq-listed global telecoms giant VimpelCom sold its majority shareholding in Telecel for $40 million as the government tried to tighten control on the country's telecom sector. The Amsterdam-based telecoms firm in 2016 announced that it had entered into an agreement with the Zimbabwean government to sell its 60% stake to a chaotic quasi-government entity, Sarnet. VimpelCom then formally confirmed that, together with its 51.9% owned subsidiary Global Telecom Holding, GTH, it had completed the sale of the equity stake for $40 million. Telecel's other shareholder, alongside GTH, were Local Empowerment Corporation, E-Corp, which had a 40% stake and was itself owned by James Makamba Kestrel, 23%, IAG, 18%, Indigenous Business Women's Organization, 17%, National Miners Association, 14%, Zimbabwe Farmers Union, 14%, and Magamba e Chimurenga, 14%. Local tycoon James Makamba was the de facto controller of Telecel. From that controversial deal, Telecel then became owned by Zarnet, the Zimbabwe Academic and Research Network, an internet service provider wholly owned by government through the Ministry of Information Communication Technology, Postal, and Courier Services. The completion of the deal meant that the Zimbabwean state owned two of the three mobile operators in the country, Telecel and Net1, leaving only Econet Wireless, which is owned by the same group as wholesale fiber operator Liquid Telecom, in the private sector Russian-based VimpelCom's 51.9% subsidiary GTH, formerly Orascom Telecom Holding, sold the 60% interest in Telecel after bids were invited from various interested parties. At the time, President Emmerson Mnangagwa's son-in-law Gerald Mlachwa, a lawyer and Telecel board director, entered the fray battling Makamba over Telecel ownership. Both claimed the company. The disposal of Telecel formed part of a strategic review by VimpelCom of its international assets. In October 2016 it sold its mobile operations in the Central African Republic and Burundi to Zimbabwe's Econet Wireless Group for $65 million. Econet Wireless already controlled the largest cellular operator in Zimbabwe, which has over 63% of the overall market ahead of state-owned Net1, around 20%, and Telecel, 16%, at the time. How Simba Chikore tied himself in knots over dodgy Zim Airways saga. When Simbarash Mutsahuni Chikore married the late former President Robert Mugabe's only daughter with ex-First Lady Grace, Bona Nyapudzayuma, in 2014 at the height of the authoritarian ruler's reign, at a lavish wedding attended by 4,000 guests and broadcast on state television while costing millions of United States dollars, he would have told himself, "I have arrived." Given his humble background, including doing some menial jobs while studying in the United States, that would have been a dream come true for Chikore. He had joined Zimbabwe's political royalty, a family whose head had run the country for 34 years without a break. It was also a family that had come to be known for opulence as demonstrated by Grace, a shopaholic whose love for top exclusive and expensive fashion brands earned her the moniker Gucci Grace. Besides, he was marrying a beautiful overseas-educated university graduate who was known and admired by some for being intelligent and scandal-free in a controversial family, unlike her dunderhead siblings notorious for being allergic to education, leading champagne lifestyles, throwing costly parties with harems of gold diggers and quaffing expensive cocktails, champagnes and whiskies. Having ascended the social ivory tower, living in the lap of luxury was guaranteed. He now had a seat at the VIP table. Some people would have assumed that his snout was now firmly lodged into the official feeding trough. Chikore's life was truly sordid, or at least it appeared to have been at the time. However, no sooner had he settled in his new dream marriage than he started venturing into the public domain and business. This saw him being deployed to Air Zimbabwe, where he became Chief Operating Officer between October 2016 and November 2017. Chikore ruled the roost at Air Zim. He called the shots even though he did not have the necessary credentials to run an airline. While at Air Zim, Chikore, a pilot who had started on a deceptive note claiming he was a captain, commander of a flight, when in fact he was a first officer, co-pilot, began making maneuvers to form a new airline using his aviation background and family ties in a $70 million shady deal supported by the then Transport Minister Yoram Gumbo. Government officials, aware of Chikore's links with the powerful Mugabe family, facilitated the deal before some concerned people raised a stink about the corrupt arrangement. The Zim Airways deal involved the formation of a new airline and purchase of new planes, used Boeing 777s and Embraers, for $70 million. The saga sucked in national flag carrier Air Zim and ministers. The airline would be owned by an entity known as Aeronautics Africa Trust, registered on November 13, 2017, a day before Mugabe was toppled by his protégés President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his deputy Constantino Chiwenga in a coup. The story of Zim Airways and Air Zim is not only that of the government's determination to press a self-destruct button on the debt-ridden state-owned airline, but that of ever-changing narratives which read like a cock-and-bull story, an implausible tale told as an excuse to cover up a bad deal and corruption. Air Zim was on its knees mainly due to extended periods of mismanagement, corruption, state impunity and poor corporate governance, among other factors. Yet in the midst of this, Treasury, which has for years poured public funds into the airline, had over the few years discreetly sunk taxpayers' money into the Zim Airways project, whose arrangement and inner workings are as clear as mud. The government said Zim Airways was a state project, and former Finance Minister Patrick Chinamasa came out in the open insisting on this. He also said the Zimbabwe Aviation Leasing Company, ZALC, associated with it was a state entity. Gumbo publicly supported that and has came out validating it. Rewind to November 2017. Gumbo had said the government was facilitating the setting up of Zim Airways owned by lawyers living in the diaspora. As drama continued to unfold, what then emerged is that directors behind ZALC, the firm which controversially fronted buying 4 Boeing 777 planes for Zim Airways, were lawyers. Documents showed Harare lawyer Philippa Phillips was one of the two ZALC directors, together with another legal practitioner Gift Watene. It was not clear why the lawyers were representing government interest there, if Chinamus's explanation was anything to go by. We were approached by the Zimbabwe Aviation Leasing Company, which said it was seeking partners, so we took them to Malaysia, which had shown interest in the Air Zimbabwe deal, but could not take it, as long as there were legacy debts, Gumbo said. So when ZALC came, my ministry was ready to assist because all we want is to use our facilities at the airport and at the same time creating jobs. Gumbo also said Chikore had nothing to do with Zim Airways as he remained an Air Zim employee. He, however, said Mugabe's then son-in-law was giving advice to Zim Airways as he was an expert in the aviation industry, without elaborating what was in it for him. During the secretive negotiations to clandestinely buy aircraft from Malaysia while at the same time trying to wind down Air Zim, Chikore, who then worked for the flag carrier, also worked with Gumbo to set up Zim Airways. Gumbo then failed to explain this conflict of interest on Chikore's involvement in the murky project. I involved Chikore when I was looking for partnerships, so Zimbabwe Airways are also seeking his advice and expertise. They are talking to him, just like Fly Africa is doing, so that he gives them best advice. He has experience in the aviation field and that is what we want, Gumbo said. Zim Airways at one time operated from Mavis Gumbo's Gletwen home. Mavis is related to the minister. It only took Chinamusa to come to Gumbo's defense when he said the Zim Airways project had been kept off the radar as a sanctions-busting measure. A closer look at the initial purchase agreement, however, for the planes, tells a different story. Documents show the sanctions-busting story is a smokescreen as the purchase agreement openly indicated the government bought the airliners on behalf of Air Zim. This suggested the sanctions-busting narrative was a convenient snake oil story to cover their tracks. Gumbo for his part did not explain why he had been telling the government Zim Airways was a state project, yet publicly insisting it was a private entity. However, Chinamusa, who officiated at the delivery of one of the aircraft in April 2018, said Zim Airways was wholly owned by the government, contrary to Gumbo's remarks. He also said ZALC was a government special purpose vehicle. Gumbo and Chinamus's explanation was that two Boeing 777-200 were bought from Malaysia Airlines through their sole agent PricewaterhouseCoopers Kuala Lumpur, but are now being leased to Zim Airways via ZALC. They claimed Zim Airways and ZALC are owned by the government. But Gumbo had always maintained they are private companies owned by Zimbabwean diasporans. It later emerged that ZALC's offices were located at 1426 Gletwen in Harare, a property owned by Mavis Gumbo, although she denied any connection to the airline. Despite her denials, details showed she is linked to Zim Airways. Documents and investigations at the time showed in October 2016 government entered into an agreement with the Malaysian airline system Bura for the sale and purchase of four Boeing 777-200 aircraft with manufacturers serial numbers 29065, 29066, 28421 and 28422. The agreement was signed by Gumbo and former Mines Minister Walter Chidakwa, Mugabe and Simba's relative, on October 10, 2016. In the terms and conditions of this agreement also signed by Lim Sanpin of Malaysia, the parties agreed the aircraft are made available for sale on the basis they are solely to be used for commercial aviation purposes. The intended operator of the aircraft is Air Zimbabwe, private, limited. The initial arrangement was that two of the Rolls-Royce powered planes would cost $16.5 million each, while the other two would be bought for $18.5 million apiece, bringing the total to $70 million. But Gumbo and his associates later decided to buy two Boeing 777s for $18.5 million and $16.5 million, a total of $35 million. It was also later resolved to buy two Embraers for $6 million using treasury bills. This brought the total of the revised deal to $41 million. However, documents show that even if the planes were bought in Air Zim's name, the flag carrier's board and management were later kept in the dark after their initial involvement. Chinamusa did not produce documents to back his account. In yet another glaring example of the government's deceit, Chinamusa and Gumbo in their joint statement to painstakingly justify the setting up of Zim Airways said the government could only bail out Air Zim once the airline had a turnaround strategy. What Gumbo did not disclose was that he had written the foreword for Air Zim's strategy for 2018 to 2020 contrary to his claims. Then came the $1 million which Chikore received from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe to set up the airline and was supposed to pay back. The money was squandered like confetti at his wedding with Bona, buying office furniture, equipment, laptops, desktops, printers and televisions, software, ticketing system, consultancy, and paying salaries, security, expatriates and building an airport office. The money went down the drain as Chikore could not register the airline to fly internationally and pay back the central bank as initially agreed. He was in 2018 arrested for corruptly hiring security companies Safeguard Security without following proper tender procedures. He was alleged to have hired the security services company for $16,445 instead of the recommended $10,000. Further, Chikore was accused of kidnapping Zim Airways legal head Bertha Zakio and detaining her for 2 hours at the airline's offices in June amid chaos at the company. He was however acquitted on kidnapping and criminal abuse of offices charges. Yet in the end, Chikore's Zim Airways' audacious bid, which included liquidating Air Zim, collapsed in chaos, while his fairy tale marriage to Bona ended in tears just on Tuesday. His only consolation though would be fighting for properties he acquired with Bona, some of them donated to the couple by Mugabe and his widow Grace. Story is a smokescreen as the purchase agreement openly indicated the government bought the airliners on behalf of Air Zim. This suggested the sanctions-busting narrative was a convenient snake oil story to cover their tracks. Gumbo for his part did not explain why he had been telling the government Zim Airways was a state project, yet publicly insisting it was a private entity. However, Chinamasa, who officiated at the delivery of one of the aircraft in April 2018 said Zim Airways was wholly owned by the government, contrary to Gumbo's remarks. He also said ZALC was a government special purpose vehicle. Gumbo and Chinamasa's explanation was that two Boeing 777-200 were bought from Malaysia Airlines through their sole agent PricewaterhouseCoopers Kuala Lumpur, but are now being leased to Zim Airways via ZALC. They claimed Zim Airways and ZALC are owned by the government. But Gumbo had always maintained they are private companies owned by Zimbabwean diasporans. It later emerged that ZALC's offices were located at 1426 Gletwin in Harare, a property owned by Mavis Gumbo, although she denied any connection to the airline. Despite her denials, details showed she is linked to Zim Airways. Documents and investigations at the time showed in October 2016 government entered into an agreement with the Malaysian airline system Bura for the sale and purchase of 4 Boeing 777-200 aircraft with manufacturers serial numbers 29065, 29066, 28421 and 28422. The agreement was signed by Gumbo and former Mines Minister Walter Chidakwa, Mugabe and Simba's relative, on October 10, 2016. In the terms and conditions of this agreement also signed by Lim Sanpin of Malaysia, the parties agreed the aircraft are made available for sale on the basis they are solely to be used for commercial aviation purposes. The intended operator of the aircraft is Air Zimbabwe, Private, Limited. The initial arrangement was that 2 of the Rolls-Royce powered planes would cost $16.5 million each, while the other 2 would be bought for $18.5 million apiece, bringing the total to $70 million. But Gumbo and his associates later decided to buy 2 Boeing 777s for $18.5 million and $16.5 million, a total of $35 million. It was also later resolved to buy 2 Embraers for $6 million using treasury bills. This brought the total of the revised deal to $41 million. However, documents show that even if the planes were bought in Air Zim's name, the flag carrier's board and management were later kept in the dark after their initial involvement. Chinamasa did not produce documents to back his account. In yet another glaring example of the government's deceit, Chinamasa and Gumbo in their joint statement to painstakingly justify the setting up of Zim Airways said the government could only bail out Air Zim once the airline had a turnaround strategy. What Gumbo did not disclose was that he had written the foreword for Air Zim's strategy for 2018 to 2020 contrary to his claims. Then came the $1 million which Chikore received from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe to set up the airline and was supposed to pay back. The money was squandered like confetti at his wedding with Bona, buying office furniture, equipment, laptops, desktops, printers and televisions, software, ticketing system, consultancy, and paying salaries, security, expatriates and building an airport office. The money went down the drain as Chikore could not register the airline to fly internationally and pay back the central bank as initially agreed. He was in 2018 arrested for corruptly hiring security companies safeguard security without following proper tender procedures. He was alleged to have hired the security services company for $16,445 instead of the recommended $10,000. Further, Chikore was accused of kidnapping Zim Airways legal head Bertha Zakio and detaining her for 2 hours at the airline's offices in June amid chaos at the company. He was however acquitted on kidnapping and criminal abuse of offices charges. Yet in the end, Chikore's Zim Airways audacious bid, which included liquidating Air Zim, collapsed in chaos, while his fairy tale marriage to Bona ended in tears just on Tuesday. His only consolation though would be fighting for properties he acquired with Bona, some of them donated to the couple by Mugabe and his widow Grace.